Boom! My life unraveled the day a crisp, official letter from the Willow Lake Estates HOA landed in my mailbox, demanding I tear down my cherished lake bridge. That weathered wooden bridge wasn't just a structure. It was my heart and soul, poured into every splintered plank and rusty nail. For years, it had been my sanctuary, stretching across a narrow inlet to connect my modest cabin to the shimmering lake behind it. I'd spent countless evenings fishing off its edge, the water lapping gently as the sun dipped below the horizon. My kids learned to skip rocks there, their laughter echoing across the lake. On quiet nights, I'd sit with a beer, staring at the stars reflected in the water, feeling like I'd carved out my own piece of paradise. But paradise, it seemed, wasn't welcome in Willow Lake Estates. My little cabin, a cozy 200-square-foot relic from my grandfather's days, sat on a small lot dwarfed by the multi-million-dollar lakefront mansions that dominated the neighborhood. Their sprawling estates, with manicured lawns and private docks, screamed wealth and exclusivity. My property, with its wildflowers and slightly overgrown grass, stuck out like a sore thumb. The bridge, hand-built over a summer with my dad's old tools, was my pride and joy. But to the HOA, it was an unapproved eyesore that didn't fit their vision of a pristine, upscale community. The letter gave me 30 days to demolish the bridge or face a $10,000 fine and potential legal action. My stomach churned as I read it, the words blurring through my anger. This wasn't just about a bridge. It was personal. The HOA, led by Karen, a self-appointed dictator and designer, Sunglasses had been nitpicking my property for years. First, it was a complaint about my mailbox being too rustic. Then, they'd grumbled about my pickup truck parked in my own driveway. I'd ignored their petty jabs, but this was war. I tried to stay calm. I called the HOA office, hoping to reason with them. The receptionist, dripping with fake politeness, said I could present my case at the next board meeting. So, I prepared. I gathered photos of the bridge, showing it was sturdy and safe. I pulled up my property deed to prove it was entirely on my land. I even offered to repaint it in a color that matched their precious aesthetic guidelines. Armed with facts and a flicker of hope, I walked into the community center, where the HOA board sat like a panel of judges in a bad reality show. Karen presided at the head of the table, her lips pursed as if she'd just tasted sour milk. The other board members, a mix of retired executives and trophy spouses, barely looked up from their phones. I laid out my case, my voice steady, despite the knot in my chest. I explained how the bridge hurt no one, how it was a personal project that connected me to my family's history. I even threw in a joke about how it was the best spot for catching bass, hoping to lighten the mood. Silence. Then Karen leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice icy. "Your bridge violates our community standards, and it's coming down." The board voted unanimously to enforce the demolition order. Not one of them asked a question or showed an ounce of empathy. As I stood there, fists clenched, Karen added, "If you don't comply, we'll make sure you regret it." The room felt like it was closing in. I walked out, the weight of their arrogance pressing down on me. This wasn't about standards, it was about power. They saw me as the little guy, the odd man out in their gated kingdom of wealth, and they wanted to crush me. That night I sat on my bridge, the lake's gentle ripples mocking the storm in my head. I thought about my grandfather, who'd bought this land decades ago when it was just a quiet fishing spot, long before the developers and their mansions arrived. He'd taught me to stand up for what's mine, to fight for what matters. As the moonlit water sparkled, an idea began to form, a spark of defiance that would soon turn into a wildfire. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just going to roll over. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them what happens when you push the wrong guy too far. Fury coursed through me, but I wasn't about to let Karen and her posse of mansion-dwelling elites bulldoze my life. They thought they could intimidate me, a guy with calloused hands and a stubborn streak, into submission. Big mistake. I'd grown up fixing problems, from busted tractor engines to leaky roofs. And if there was one thing I knew, it was how to outsmart a bully. The HOA wanted a fight. I'd give them one they'd never forget. I started by digging into the HOA's playbook. I pulled out the dusty binder of bylaws they'd sent when I moved in, its pages filled with jargon about community standards and architectural harmony. I read every line, cross-referencing with my property deed and the county's land records. Late nights at my kitchen table, fueled by black coffee and determination, revealed a gold mine. My small lot included a critical piece of the lake's drainage system. A culvert, a concrete pipe running under my land, regulated the lake's water flow, keeping it at the perfect level for those glittering mansions to call themselves Lakefront. Without that culvert, the lake could either flood, or better, yet dry up like a desert puddle. The discovery hit me like a lightning bolt. Those $5 million properties with their private docks and postcard views depended on my culvert to maintain their value. If the lake vanished, so would their bragging rights and their property prices. It was a leverage point the HOA hadn't considered, probably because they never imagined the hillbilly in the cabin would outsmart them. But I wasn't ready to play my trump card just yet. I wanted to give them one last chance to back off, to see if reason could prevail over their bloated egos. I drafted a letter to the HOA board, proposing a compromise. I'd reinforce the bridge with new beams, paint it to match their precious color palette, and even add decorative railings to make it community-friendly. I sent it certified mail, ensuring Karen couldn't claim she never got it. Days passed with no response. Then, a second letter arrived from the HOA, this one even nastier than the first. Your failure to comply with the demolition order will result in legal action, it read. We will pursue all remedies, including liens on your property. Attached was a $500 pre-litigation fee for their trouble. That did it. I drove to the community center for an unscheduled showdown at their next board meeting. The room smelled of expensive perfume and self-importance. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members who looked like they'd rather be at a yacht club. I didn't wait for permission to speak. You're targeting my bridge for no reason, I said, holding up my deed. It's on my land, it's safe, and I've offered to meet your standards. Why are you doing this? Karen leaned back, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass. You don't belong here, Mr. Thompson, she said. Your property drags down our community's value. Comply or we'll sue you into oblivion. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement from the board. One member, a guy in a golf shirt worth more than my truck, chuckled and said, Maybe you should sell and move somewhere. More your speed. I walked out, my blood boiling but my mind racing. Karen's words echoed, You don't belong here. This wasn't just about the bridge. It was about erasing me from their perfect little world. But they'd underestimated me. I wasn't some pushover they could scare with fines and lawsuits. I'd spent years solving problems with my hands and my head, and now I had the ultimate weapon, control over their precious lake. Back home, I sat on my porch, staring at the culvert's rusty grate half hidden by weeds. It was unassuming, just a pipe sticking out of the ground, but it held the key to turning the tables. I started researching water flow, pulling up old irrigation manuals from my farming days and scouring online forums for tips. The math was simple. Block the culvert, stop the outflow, and the lake would shrink. No water, no lakefront mansions, just a bunch of overpriced houses staring at a mudflat. I consulted a lawyer friend, Mike, to make sure I was in the clear. Over beers at his office, he reviewed my deed and the county's water management records. The culvert's on your land, he confirmed. You can block it, modify it, whatever, as long as you're not flooding anyone's property. Draining. The lake? Totally legal, he grinned. Just don't tell me the details. Plausible deniability. That sealed it. The HOA had drawn first blood, but I was about to hit back. Hard. I wasn't just fighting for my bridge. I was fighting for every little guy who'd ever been pushed around by people who thought money made them untouchable. Karen and her cronies had no idea what was coming, and that made it all the sweeter. With the HOA's threats ringing in my ears, I hatched a plan that was as bold as it was risky. Block the culvert and drain the lake that made those mansions Lakefront. It was a calculated move, one that would hit Karen and her cronies where it hurt most, their property values. I wasn't an engineer, but years of tinkering with irrigation systems on my old farm gave me enough know-how to pull this off. The culvert, a concrete pipe hidden in the weeds on my property, was the key. Stop the water from flowing out, and the lake would shrink, leaving those 5 Mellors estates overlooking a muddy swamp. I waited for the cover of darkness to avoid prying eyes. The mansions around me had security cameras, and the last thing I needed was some nosy neighbor spotting me. At midnight, I slipped out to my shed, grabbing a wheelbarrow, a shovel, and every concrete block I could scrounge up from my last home. Project. The air was cool, the lake still as glass, reflecting the moon like a taunting reminder of what I was about to disrupt. I worked quietly, my breath visible in the chilly night, hauling gravel and blocks to the culvert's mouth. Each trip felt like a small rebellion, my muscles straining as I stacked the materials with precision. Sealing the culvert wasn't just about piling stuff in front of it. I had to make sure the blockage was watertight, or the plan wouldn't work. I mixed quick-set concrete in a bucket, using a flashlight to check my work. Layer by layer, I filled the pipe's entrance, packing gravel and dirt to reinforce it. By 3 a.m., the culvert was plugged solid, a fortress of stone and concrete that no water could escape. I stood back, wiping sweat from my brow, and felt a surge of adrenaline. The lake's outflow was stopped, but it would take days for the water level to drop noticeably. Patience was my ally now. To cover my tracks, I spent the next morning playing the part of the compliant neighbor. I mowed my lawn, waved at passers-by, and even left the bridge untouched, knowing the HOA would be watching. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the lake. At first, nothing seemed different. The water still lapped at the docks, and the mansion's reflections danced on the surface. But I knew the math. The lake was fed by a small creek, and without the culvert's drainage, it would lose more water to evaporation and seepage than it gained. Every day, I walked to the shore, pretending to check my fishing gear, and noted the waterline creeping lower, exposing a thin strip of muddy bank. I wasn't reckless, though. I called my lawyer friend, Mike, to triple-check my plan's legality. Over coffee at his cluttered office, he flipped through my property records and nodded. "The culvert's yours to control," he said, tapping the deed. "As long as you're not flooding anyone's land, you're golden. Just keep it subtle." He winked, but I could tell he was impressed by my audacity. I also researched the lake's ecosystem, making sure I wouldn't harm any protected species. The fish would survive in the deeper pockets of water, and the lake could be refilled later. This wasn't about destruction. It was about leverage. To keep the HOA off my scent, I sent them a fake compliance letter, saying I was exploring options for the bridge's removal. It bought me time while the lake slowly betrayed them. I imagined Karen sipping her morning latte, oblivious to the fact that her precious view was about to vanish. The thought kept me going through sleepless nights as I checked the culvert daily to ensure it held. By day 5, the first signs appeared. A neighbor's dock tilted slightly, its posts poking out of the water like awkward stilts. A faint stench of exposed lakebed mud wafted through the air. I overheard 2 mansion owners grumbling at the community mailbox about low water levels and poor maintenance. I bit my lip to hide a smirk. The HOA hadn't connected the dots yet, and I wasn't about to tip them off. My plan was working, and the best part? They had no idea I was behind it. A week after I sealed the culvert, the lake began to betray the HOA's arrogance. What was once a sparkling expanse of water, reflecting the mansion's grandeur, was now a shrinking puddle. Docks that once hosted cocktail parties sat stranded on cracked, muddy lake bed, their pilings jutting out like broken teeth. The shoreline, once lush with cattails and water lilies, was a stinking morass of exposed silt and decaying fish. The air carried a faint whiff of rot, and the mansion's pristine views were replaced by a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I'd walk to the lake's edge each morning, pretending to check my fishing gear and marvel at the growing strip of mud, proof my plan was working. The neighborhood was in chaos. I overheard snippets of panic at the community mailbox. "My dock's useless," one mansion owner grumbled. "This is ruining our investment," another whined. Social media exploded with their outrage. On the Willow Lake Estates Facebook group, residents posted photos of their stranded boats and muddy yards captioned with hashtags like lake disaster and hoe failure. One particularly dramatic post from a real estate agent read, "Who's going to buy a $5 million lakefront home with no lake? Fix this now." I scrolled through the comments, biting back a grin as theories flew. Climate change, county neglect, even sabotage by outsiders. Not one suspected me, the quiet guy in the cabin. The HOA scrambled to respond. Karen called an emergency meeting, and I slipped into the back of the community center, blending in with the crowd. The room buzzed with angry voices, mansion owners, in designer clothes waving their arms like they could will the water back. Karen stood at the podium, her usual smugness replaced by a strained smile. "We're investigating the issue," she said, flipping through notes. "We've contacted the county water board, and they're looking into possible drought conditions." Drought conditions? In a region that got 50 inches of rain a year? I nearly laughed out loud. She was grasping at straws, and the crowd wasn't buying it. A red-faced man in a polo shirt stood up. "My property value's tanked. I've got buyers pulling out. What are you doing about it?" Others chimed in, their voices rising. Karen tried to deflect, blaming unforeseen environmental factors and promising a full investigation. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, savoring the moment. They had no idea the answer was sitting in their midst, in flannel and work boots. The next day, HOA inspectors prowled the neighborhood, poking around the lake's edges with clipboards and confused looks. They stopped at the boundary of my property, where a "no trespassing" sign I'd conveniently posted kept them at bay. My lawyer, Mike, had already sent them a letter, politely reminding them that the culvert was on my land, and any attempt to access it without permission would be a legal violation. The inspectors left empty-handed, and I could almost feel Karen's frustration from across the lake. Online, the drama escalated. A local news blog picked up the story, running a headline, "Mystery of Willow Lake's Vanishing Waters." Residents flooded the comments with complaints, some even hinting at lawsuits against the HOA. Karen's name came up repeatedly, her leadership under fire. I kept my head down, but the thrill of watching their empire crumble was intoxicating. My culvert blockade was invisible, yet it had turned their world upside down. Then Karen showed up at my door, her face a mix of fury and desperation. "This lake issue is a community crisis," she said, her voice tight. "You need to cooperate with our investigation." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as could be. "Funny you mentioned cooperation," I said. "I offered to fix the bridge, and you threatened to sue me. Maybe we can talk if you drop the demolition order." Her eyes narrowed, but she knew she had no leverage. She stormed off, muttering about legal consequences. I just smiled. She was playing checkers, I was playing chess. By day 10, the EEI lake was a fraction of its former self. Fish flopped in shrinking pools and the smell of mud hung heavy. Real estate signs sprouted like weeds as mansion owners tried to cut their losses. The HOA's phone lines were flooded with complaints, and Karen's pristine reputation was sinking faster than the water level. I kept my routine, mowing my lawn, fishing off my bridge while the chaos unfolded. The best part? They still hadn't connected the dots. My culvert, my rules, my victory. 2 weeks after I sealed the culvert, the lake was a ghost of itself. A muddy scar where shimmering water once reflected the mansion's grandeur. The HOA's empire was crumbling, and the pressure finally broke them. A crisp letter arrived, not in the usual threatening tone, but with a hint of desperation. Signed by the entire board, it requested an urgent meeting to discuss a resolution regarding the lake and your bridge. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. They'd blinked first. I agreed to the meeting but set the terms. It would be at my cabin, on my turf. The board arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, looking like a funeral procession. Karen led the pack, her designer sunglasses failing to hide the bags under her eyes. The other members, once smug in their boardroom, shuffled awkwardly on my porch, their polished shoes sinking into the dirt. I invited them to sit at my weathered picnic table, offering coffee in mismatched mugs. They declined, clearly uncomfortable being out of their element. I savored every second of it. Karen started, her voice strained but trying to sound authoritative. The lake situation is a crisis for the community, she said. We're prepared to negotiate to restore the water levels. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Funny you mention community, I said. When I asked to keep my bridge, you threatened to sue me into oblivion. Now you want my help? The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. One, a retired banker named Tom, cleared his throat. We may have been hasty, he admitted. Let's find a solution that works for everyone. I laid out my demands. Retract the bridge demolition order, pay for its repairs to meet their standards, and exempt me from HOA fees forever. In return, I'd unblock the culvert and let the lake refill. Karen's face twisted like she'd swallowed a lemon, but the others nodded quickly. They knew the score. Real estate agents had stopped showing the mansions. For sale signs were multiplying, and the local news was now calling it the Willow Lake debacle. Their $5 properties were worthless without the lake, and I held the key. After a tense huddle, the board agreed to everything. I made them put it in writing, signed by every member, with my lawyer reviewing the document. Karen signed last, her pen shaking as she scrawled her name. I could tell she hated every second, but her reign was over. The next day I hired a contractor to reinforce the bridge with new beams, fresh paint, and sturdy railings, better than ever, and all on the HOA's dime. Unblocking the culvert was almost as satisfying as sealing it. I worked under the midday sun, prying out the concrete blocks and gravel with a crowbar, sweat dripping as water began to trickle through. Within days, the lake started to refill, its surface creeping back toward the docks. The mansions regained their shine, but the HOA's reputation was in tatters. Residents whispered about Karen's mismanagement, and she quietly put her mansion on the market. By month's end, she was gone, moving to some other gated community to terrorize. I stood on my newly restored bridge, casting a line into the refilled lake. The water sparkled again, but it felt different now, like a trophy I'd earned. Neighborhood kids started coming by, asking to skip rocks like my own had years ago. Even a few mansion owners, humbled by the ordeal, gave me friendly nods when they passed. My little cabin, once an eyesore to them, was now a symbol of defiance. I'd taken on the HOA's Goliath and won, not with money or lawyers, but with grit and a culvert. The victory wasn't just about the bridge. It was about standing up to bullies who think wealth gives them the right to control others. Every time I walk across those planks, I'm reminded that the little guy can win if he's smart and stubborn enough. The HOA never bothered me again. No fines, no letters, no complaints about my rustic mailbox or my old pickup. They'd learned their lesson. Mess with me, and I'll drain your dreams. So what's the takeaway? Never underestimate someone with nothing to lose and a plan to win. If you loved this story, smash that like button hit subscribe, and ring the bell for more epic tales of sticking it to the man. Drop your own HOA horror stories in the comments. I want to hear how you fought back. Until next time, keep fighting. For what's yours, and never let the Karens of the world push you around.